This webinar is for you if you're a couple different types of people or several different types of people. If you are a law student applying to jobs and nothing's happened, this webinar is for you. If you are an attorney with great qualifications and went to a top law school, this webinar is for you. If you are an attorney in a mid-sized firm, this webinar is for you. And if you're an attorney that's, in a position where, you may not have gone to a great law school and you've been applying to firms and nothing's happened, this webinar. And, from your standpoint, I can imagine how many people are very discouraged by the market because I'm just seeing a lot of fear. And in addition, we have other businesses like Law Crossing that employers pay to post jobs on, and that's slowing down. And law firms providing BCG with jobs is slowing down. So, and in some cases, quite dramatic. So there's a lot of fear in the market. There's fear from attorneys that aren't getting interviews, and there's also fear from law firms to do hiring. So, this webinar, of course, is made in late 2024, but I'm telling you that this can affect anybody. It can affect you even in a good economy if you're in the wrong practice here, like bankruptcy, for example. It can affect you, if you're in law school and you're applying to firms and nothing's happening. It can apply to you if you're in a major market and you're applying to firms and nothing's happening. So I'm going to talk to you today about the problem. I'm also going to talk to you about what you can do in response to the problem at the end of this webinar. And I'm also going to give you examples of what other people have done in this situation. Now, even if you're gainfully employed in a law firm right now, and you think you're safe and everything is good, or you're in a law firm and the work is slowing down, from everything that I've read and studied in terms of the economy, and I study things like this like at least an hour a day, I think the economy is in trouble for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not going to get into it here, but if the economy is in trouble and you need to know what to do in your job search and how to approach, what to do. And I think it's very, very important. And what I'm going to teach you to do today is stuff that no one else is doing. So a very small percentage of attorneys, I would say less than 3%, really know what to do when the market slows down and when they're not getting jobs. And so my goal for you today is to walk away with the tools that are not going to affect you like they're affecting other attorneys. I wanted to make, an additional point to you that's kind of scary. So when you get into a market that is slowing down, what happens is attorneys that are very, very good attorneys pour into the market. So you're also competing with them for jobs. So unless you have the best qualifications, it's going to be even harder for you to find a job than it would initially because the competition heats up for the few jobs that are there. And when this happens to a lot of people, and I've seen this over and over again, I saw it in 2000, I saw it in 2008 and 2011. When this happens over and over again, people that have the right approach are the ones that end up getting jobs and staying employed. The people that don't have the right approach are the ones that don't end up getting jobs and are unemployed. I'm going to give you some examples here, but I just want to make you aware of how scary this is, because if you are in a position where your workload is suddenly slowing down, or you're losing your job, or you're worried, you should be. Some of the economic indicators that that I've studied that are very, very interesting are things like Warren Buffett. Like Warren Buffett, before the late 2000 .com crash, started hoarding a lot of money. So they sold all his stocks and started keeping 30-40% of his investments in cash. Did the same thing in 2008, and then is doing it now more than he has at any time in the entire history of his funds. So what does that mean? That means that he's expecting a major, major correction in the market because the stock market is very high right now. He's expecting that cash will enable him to buy companies at a radically discount price. He's expecting that things are going to get very, very bad and he's better off out of the market. So this webinar, I think for you right now is very, very important because you may be applying to firms and getting rejected and think it has something to do with you. But in reality, it's going to be based on market forces, and those market forces are discussed today. So I'm going to tell you today, of course, how to build resilience because everybody needs to have resilience. You need strategies to overcome what's happening, to fight it. I'm going to teach you how to use rejection appropriately and how to respond to it and what you should do. And, I just want to give you a couple quick points that I think are very, very interesting. So for a long time, I was taking these acting classes and getting very involved in the acting business, and which was kind of fun. It was a hobby, but then it turned a little bit serious after I had some really positive feedback. But people that succeed in things like acting, I mean, it's not, they have to often go on an incredible number of interview, like tryouts. I mean, to the extent that they may be doing, two or three of them a day, driving all over Los Angeles for even years before they get something. And it's very, very difficult. What acting agents do, which is kind of interesting, is you will go and they will represent you, but then they will just send you to every possible thing that you could get a part with. They won't, the actors and stuff that are starting out or even experienced won't simply apply to 5 places and get rejected and quit. They may apply to 10,000 places and get one thing. So this is what people do in this industry. And it's something that attorneys certainly don't do in their job searches. I'm going to tell you more about that. And it's difficult being an attorney. It's very difficult because you spend a lot of time preparing to go to law school and doing the best you can. You go to law school, you spend a lot of money. You're very, very competitive with your other students, and you're going to get a lot of rejection, and it's going to happen throughout your entire career. Meaning, you cannot, regardless of your qualifications and what a great attorney you think you are, absent having like a large book of business or something along those lines, you are going to experience a lot of rejection in your career. So much so that it may be overwhelming. Many law students quit the practice of law before they even start. Many young attorneys quit the practice of law very early in their careers. Many attorneys that could be employed full-time in law firms will do things like take contract jobs. All sorts of things can happen. You can get rejected by the bar when you fail. I mean, all these things are part of being an attorney, and it's very, very hard. It's ego crushing. And it's ego crushing regardless of the state of your career. I work with lots and lots of senior attorneys that don't have a business, and they may need to apply to 700 firms to get an interview. I mean, this is, and they may have they may have been partners in major law firms. I mean, this sort of rejection is very, very hard. And most actors and actresses don't succeed because they don't put in the effort to go out on all these things, and they don't put in the effort to constantly try to improve themselves to get better parts, and they take rejection personally and think maybe my career is over, when all it takes is one thing, one part. If they get one part, then that can change their entire career. And if you talk to many successful actors and you read their bios, that's exactly what happens. They go out on just they go out on countless auditions. They do everything they possibly can. They continue to improve themselves, and eventually things will happen. I was watching a talk by Arnold Schwarzenegger the other day, and it was the same thing. I watched a talk by Elon Musk with all the rejection that he faced. It was the same thing. And you just cannot take rejection personally. There's if you learn how to persevere, which I'm going to show you how to do today, and you don't allow your ego to get in the way of your success and happiness, then you're going to succeed. Because getting rejected by a firm is meaningless thing. The firm may not have the work. They may have a better applicant. They may have had a job and it's posted on LinkedIn, Law Crossing, or Indeed or something, and now they've filled it or they don't have it anymore. I mean, you cannot ever let your ego get in the way. And, who am I and why am I telling you this? And what do I have that other people don't have? I have reviewed the resumes of over 650,000 attorneys out of 1.5 million or more than 1.6 million attorneys in the United States. I've tried to place a percentage of those that I think are marketable, and I know what happens. I know about rejection. I know about the people that get jobs and those that don't. And I'll tell you what happens at BCG, because this may happen to you. People come into our company and we tell them about current jobs that we have. Maybe they think, okay, I'm going to make sure I'm the perfect fit for the job before applying. So a lot of people might apply to 3, they might apply to 5 positions. Nothing happens. And they think, wow, there's something wrong with this recruiting firm. Not the case. In a very good market after coming out of COVID with all this financial stimulus and stuff, there were so many firms jumping up and down to interview people. We had to hire 15 people just to respond to them. I mean, this is what happens in good economies, but in bad, it's completely different. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about acting, because I want you to see, what people do in that profession that you should be doing in your profession as an attorney. Like I said earlier, these actors and actresses, regardless of who they are, and I met a lot of very famous people. I mean, they will all tell you that they just kept getting rejected over and over and over again, regardless of it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, regardless of it's whoever it is. That's what happened. There's very few stories about people that were able to become famous, get jobs, and have careers that didn't spend years trying to get a position. And they tried hard. I mean, while they're taking acting classes, they're waiting tables, working on their voice, working on their posture, figuring out how to dress. They're doing all these things to try to be as appealing as they possibly can to people that might employ them. They may drive a few hours just to an audition, sitting in traffic in LA, sitting in a room with 25 other people that are going to go in and read a line for 30 seconds and then ask to leave. And this is what happens. And that's and hope that someone calls, and they usually don't. So sometimes they may travel to another city, they may fly to another city, and they may be told again, and they keep going, and they're just rejected over and over and over, and it's personal because they may feel like they're the best fit for the job. They may feel that it was unfair whoever got it. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that happen when people are trying to do stuff and succeed. They just don't give up. The people that persevere are the ones that ultimately succeed. And when they don't get a job, they continually work on improving themselves, improving their acting, improving their self-esteem, and they just keep pushing forward. And a lot of them don't. You may get rejected if you're an actor or actress by 1,000 different places. Then you might get a small break, a small part in a film where you're just standing in the background, and then you may be rejected 500 times again. But people in that industry know that the only possible way that they're going to succeed is if they just don't give up and they don't allow themselves to take it personally when they're rejected. They just keep going and they keep going and they keep going. And, this is what it's like to be an attorney. Like, you have to understand that the market you're in, you may not be finding openings, you may not be getting interviews, and you may think that you need to quit. And that's just not the case. What if you were unemployed and you had an interest in the practice area and you started writing journal articles and you started going to events and associations related to that, and you started becoming a better and better attorney and doing whatever you could to stick out and believing in yourself, and you keep trying, and if you do that, you're going to succeed. And every famous star, again, like I said, has been rejected hundreds of times. Many of them have been told that they should leave the profession, that they don't have any skills, and it's just not that way. You can't allow your ego to get in the way of anything. And if you give up, then and you don't have the strength to continue, and you feel like rejection is too much, then you fail. So it's the same thing, by the way, with attorneys. So many people in this profession, meaning everybody. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many times it took you to pass the bar. I don't care if you are at the best firm in the country and you think that you should not be rejected because you're so great. And this is what a lot of people think. People that continue, people that persevere, succeed. And just always when you're in the market, just think about you're in a snapshot in time. And if you are 25 years old, you will literally probably be seen, if you stick with it, for another 60 years, meaning you can practice into your 80s. So why worry about a little blip in the path of you trying to get employed? Why does that matter? Why is 1 out of 60 years, or less than 1.5% of the time you're going to be practicing? Why is that something that should give you a setback? It's just something that gives you the motivation to improve and to continue and keep going. And I want to just again make a small point, and I think this point is very important because so many people don't understand this. It's the attorneys often from the best backgrounds that give up. It's not. They think they have a sense of entitlement. They think they should be getting certain types of jobs. They think they should be making a certain amount of money. And when the market doesn't respond, they get very, very upset, and they think all sorts of things. They don't know what to do, and they often quit. So I'll just submit to you that if you are the most successful type of attorney on this meeting, you are probably one of the people that needs to listen the most carefully, because you may not be used to as much rejection and that may hold you back. So rejection is not something that you need to take personally. It absolutely has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the market. It has to do with other people in the market. It has to do with your practice area. If you are in like a corporate related practice area right now, it's very, very slow. Even in the large firms, there's not a lot of openings in big cities. And openings that there are, there's probably going to be a better candidates than you. Rejection happens because of the geographic area of the country you're in. Some geographic areas get slow at different times. And I'll give an example later, but Texas always gets slow when oil prices go down. So an example would be someone like Trump in the office getting energy prices down. Texas suddenly becomes a good market. And there's all these things that you don't necessarily understand when you're looking for a job, when you're in the market, that are just market forces that have absolutely nothing to do with you. And what is ego? Ego is the sense that my self-worth is based on my ability to get a fast job, or my job quickly, or my self-worth is being rejected, and therefore if people are insulting my ego by not interviewing or hiring me, then I'm very mad and I'm going to quit. And candidates that I represent, and when someone comes into BCG, and this is not a pitch for BCG, this is a pitch for how you need to conduct your search. But when I work with candidates in BCG, I will never give up. Like, I will continually find opportunities for them. I will send them jobs. I will send them firms to approve that have interviewed people similar to them in the past. I will send them firms that are strong in their practice area, may not have openings. I will review firms that have had openings in the past in the practice area and send them those jobs. But here's what happens. Most people give up. I don't give up on our candidates. I never do. I mean, if they go into an interview and they're drunk or something, obviously I'm going to give up, but I never give up. And what happens most of the time, meaning 80% of the time, is people give up on themselves. They think if they've gotten this rejection, then there must be something wrong, and they need to, it's their fault, it's BCG's fault, but in reality, it's not anybody's fault. It's just you need to be applying to a lot of places, and you need to not be giving up. I mean, this is what, it's extremely important. You're in the market for a position, and you are representing essentially yourself. Meaning, if you're an attorney representing a client trying to get them a certain result, you would not give up. If you really had the time and the resources and you wanted to win a case or whatever it was, you would not give up. Watch movies about attorneys that are rejected by the market, that may be down and out, that get a case that everyone tells them they can't win, and they persist when everyone tells them they should stop. That's what a good attorney does. And that's what you also need to do with your job search. You need to have the ability to not stop, to keep going, to never give up. And you have to be in your job search for the long haul. You have to be applying to lots and lots of places. You have to not take rejection seriously. I mean, sometimes people do something like this. Like, they apply to a firm, and the firm just, it's like a Bud Light at a Texas barbecue, just says no, or doesn't respond at all. Then they think, oh, I better call the firm and tell them, ask them why I was rejected and try to figure it out. No, you don't. You just need to keep applying. If a law firm's not interviewing you, then you're not the best candidate, or they don't have an opening. It's as simple as that. And when I work with candidates, and I'm telling you this is what you can do for yourself, I will always talk to them before the interview. I will always try to get feedback if I can from them in the firm. But it's not always easy. And I will keep representing them, because each interview you go on, or each rejection you receive, is just feedback. It's just market feedback. Is there a product market fit in the market that you're in? And if there's not, then you just need to keep going. And I personally believe in people. This is my passion. I believe in people because I know that anyone that puts himself in their job search for the long haul, I know that anybody that's applying to enough places and enough locations will always get something. You will. I mean, it's absolutely 100% that if you keep applying to firms and you keep taking rejection or learning from it, you will do well. It has nothing to do with you when you're rejected. You need to believe in yourself and your worth as an attorney, and you need to keep moving forward. And it's only a matter of time before you'll land in the right place. I will talk to you a little bit right now about your self-esteem. So you have to be strong. You have to learn how to talk to yourself, and you need to learn how to persevere. You need to get motivated, get watch motivational videos on YouTube, whether it's from Anthony Robbins or whoever it is. You need to watch my videos if they motivate you. You need to stay motivated and you need to tell yourself that you have worth and you can keep going. Almost every successful person out there, and if you watch, regardless of who it is, almost every successful person out there has goals. They have a goal to be the best at something, and they put all their marbles in that, and they do whatever they can to be successful at something. I was reading again, Elon Musk. Why not talk about the richest man in the world? When 2008 came, he was down to $30 million, which for someone like him is not a lot of money at all. He had two companies that were failing. One of them was SpaceX and the other one was Tesla. Both of them were failing. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he had a belief in himself that he could start a company that would allow him to be very, very successful. That he had a belief in himself that SpaceX would work. He had a belief in himself that Tesla would work. So this last $30 million, he decided to put that money into both companies. He split it up. He had SpaceX, where he'd already launched 3 rockets that had failed. And then he was able to come up with the parts for the 4th rocket. The last rocket he had money to launch, and he launched it and it succeeded. And it was the same thing with Tesla. There were several moments where it looked like that company was going to go out of business, and he kept believing in them. So you have to have a goal and you have to believe in yourself. And being in a position where everything is failing and where you're not getting offers and where you're not getting interviews, you have to believe in yourself and keep going. You need to talk to yourself in a positive manner. I mean, people will sit in front of the mirror and they'll tell themselves they're great and what their goals are, where they're looking at the mirror, and they'll do things like that. And that's what you need to do for yourself if you're going to be successful. You cannot just think that get carried away by the market and have no goals. People that have no goals are the people that are unhappy. They take what other people give them, and that's all they get. If you have a goal in mind and you really follow that goal, then you will potentially do very, very well. There's a website out there. It's kind of interesting. It's free. It's called heroonamission.com. So it's heroonamission.com. And there's also a book that goes along with it, but it's just like an online thing. It's free. You can enter your 1-year goals, your 5-year goals, your 10-year goals. You can do things like write your obituary about the kind of person you want to be. And this is the kind of stuff you need to do. You need to have self-talk, and you need to make sure that you're believing in yourself, and you have ways of continually believing in yourself when you're getting just negative feedback up and down. And this is what happens to every attorney. I went to a top 10 law school, and fortunately they had a lot of on-campus interviewing and stuff, but there might be 300 firms that came to interview back then, and then you would throw your hat in the ring with maybe 100 of them, and you might get 15 interviews or something, and you would you're hopefully will get 1 or 2 offers. But that's a lot of rejection. Even if you're a really good student at a really good law school, you are getting accustomed to the rejection early in your career. And other attorneys don't cast such a wide net. They just apply often to just a few places. I mean, I literally get on these webinars each week, and almost always someone says, I've applied to 30 jobs and nothing's happening. I'm discouraged and stop. Absolutely insane. You can never throw in the towel. You need to believe in yourself. And throwing in the towel is the biggest possible mistake you can make. You can never throw in the towel at any point in your career, regardless of the point in your career, whether or not you're a beginning attorney, whether or not you've been practicing for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. If you throw in the towel, you're done. So that's kind of one of the most important rules that you can learn. And most attorneys have very sensitive egos. They get their ego all tied up, and they think that because good things aren't happening, something never will. I'm in this business group, and in the business group, there's several people that are attorneys. And for whatever reason, a lot of them are personal injury attorneys. And there's one guy I met that he is a personal injury attorney, and he graduated from, I think, Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And he told himself he wanted to be a personal injury attorney, but he was at the very bottom of his class. It took him a year and a half to get his first job. And when he got his first job, he went in there, he told himself, he was like, I want to be the best personal injury attorney I possibly can be. I want to be known all over Los Angeles. I want to make $5 million a year, which sounds ridiculous if you are someone that's at the bottom of your class from a local LA law school. Sounds crazy, right? Well, he just kept persevering. And within 7 or 8 years of graduating, he had drastically exceeded his goal of what he wanted to be. And he had a big firm with like 30 other attorneys working for him. And he had that goal. And regardless of your intelligence, regardless, and when I say intelligence, I mean your natural aptitude for law, regardless of or your LSATs or whatever it is, or law school you went to, regardless of who you are, it doesn't matter. You have to believe in yourself and not worry about rejection and your ego, meaning how you perceive yourself if you get rejected. What that means, it's a bump or against your self-esteem. No, you are just, when you're applying to work with other people are trying to make money. So you're a way for them to make money, and a commodity, meaning just think about it. I mean, you're just something. If they hire you and you bill 2,000 hours a year, maybe they make half of what you're billing. I don't know, but that's what it is. You're just a commodity. And in hiring decisions are driven by external market conditions that have nothing to do with you. So I want to go back to you and just explain to you that, like, post-COVID, or when it was ending, there was so much hiring activity. It was just radical. I mean, the number of job openings like doubled or tripled like in a very, very short time. And you started to have all this stuff like people quitting because they can get other jobs. And these are external market forces. And right now you have an election, you have wars, you have all these things that are slowing down. And we're in, mid-September of 2004. You have all these things that are actually making it more difficult for you to get a job. Now, you may be in a practice area and a location where there's a lot of jobs right now. I don't know. But again, these are controlled by geographic locations. They're controlled by the fact that elections happening. They're controlled by the amount of work that companies are doing. They're controlled by all these market forces that have absolutely nothing to do with you. So you go into a great market and all of a sudden you feel like a million bucks. You don't. So all this stuff has nothing to do with you. So you have to realize that it's not about you. It's about market forces, but it's also about your practice area and all these other things that you cannot control. Your self-worth should be completely independent about whether or not you're succeeding in your job search. You're valuable, but you have to put yourself in a position where other people see that. So, it's just, attorneys that come out of great law schools often get a very, very strong sense of their self-worth earlier in their career, but later things can change. There's all these rules kind of going on in the background that a lot of times people may not be aware of. So, for example, as a worker bee in a law firm, meaning doing work, getting assignments and things like that, you're going to be most marketable to law firms your first 5 years out of law school. If you're in the right practice at the right time, in the right market, you're going to be the most marketable. But, in your beginning of your first year, you're not going to be marketable to your school. So you need to, maybe your second year, you start becoming marketable. After 5 years, opportunities start being fewer and fewer. It's a function of how law firms work. You may be in a law firm or in a market where corporate work slows down. There's not enough corporate work coming in. And so all the people are getting laid off and competing for fewer and fewer jobs. It's not your fault. You need to understand that your practice area, the market you're in, and all these sorts of things will affect, if you're employable. And then after 5 years, you're either expected to be on the partnership track somewhere, have portable business. Now, none of this matters. None of this says that you're not going to succeed. But what it does say is that for most people, not all, you're going to get the best reception from the market early in your career, only later when you start having a lot of business. So, everybody watching this has probably received a lot of rejection. I don't care who you are. You're going to receive a lot of rejection. And you need to understand that it's the market's fault, not yours. And also, you shouldn't be blaming yourself because it's not your fault. Now, there's a couple other things I just want to bring to your attention very, very quickly. So we had a resume review workshop last week. Your resume, by the way, is something that you should always be looking at. You should understand that your resume is going to impact many times whether or not you get a job. So I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't done so, to go and watch some of my resume review videos, because you will see we take people in those workshops that are not marketable and we turn them into marketable attorneys by following certain rules that are going to make them more marketable. And this is an idea of what you do to improve. Like, what do you do to make yourself look more marketable compared to other people? And your resume, by the way, is an easy fix. Most resumes, I would say 90% of them, aren't good. And because they're not good, people are not getting interviews. So you need to, in addition to believing in yourself, you need to make sure that you present yourself in the best possible way. And so you need to look at your resume, you need to understand what's wrong with your resume. And even though you may not like it, you need to fix all sorts of things. So, I mean, some examples are people will list all this non-relevant experience on their resume that's not related to one practice area, and they will expect to get hired. Or they will just do all these things on their resumes. They'll turn them into political statements, alienating Democrats or Republicans or whatever. So there's all sorts of things you need to do with your resume. Please, I beg of you to go and watch resume review videos that I've done on BCG. I did one last week. You can, if you believe in yourself and you take the right actions with your resume and then how you apply to firms, which I'm going to talk to you about today, you are going to be able to profoundly increase your chances of getting positions. But again, you just can't control market forces. You can control your resume. You can control the number of places you apply to. And you have to keep going. And you're going to find, by the way, you're going to find a job. Everybody will. What does that mean? It means that there are people that, like you, that got started like you, got rejected by firms like you, and will see your resume and see part of themselves in you. I mean, that's, or just they'll have work. They won't be getting applications, and they all of a sudden you appear and they have work. So, like an actor or an actress, you just can't give up. You need to keep improving yourself. And I just want to come back to the example of the actor and actress that's going out and kind of going all in on being good. They don't just go out on auditions. They take classes all the time to be good actors and actresses. They go and put themselves in situations. They go to certain bars or hotels like the Beverly Hilton and stuff, and they sit at the bar and they try to meet producers and things. Or they work in jobs. I knew one woman that became a pretty well-known actress and a very, very well-connected in the industry. And she took a job in a salon in Beverly Hills that she knew a lot of actors and actresses, like famous people, went to get their hair done. And so she would wash their hair and talk to them about what she did. I think she was a hair washer, and she had gone to a good school like Berkeley or something. And this is what she did. She put herself in those situations. She continually took acting classes. She worked on her body by fitness and things, and just really became the best person she could possibly be. So, this particular part of the webinar, you need to follow the work and not your ego. I'll talk to you about some professional actors who aren't famous. They will literally go all over the world to get work. I knew of a group of 20 actors and actresses in Los Angeles, from Italy. This is an acting training I went to, from Scotland, England, and Poland and everything. They all went to this thing in Sardinia, this 1 week of acting training. They didn't go there because they wanted to get training from the acting teacher, who was very, very good and got all these people like Carmen Diaz and started in the industry. But they went there just because there was a famous casting agent that was going to come there and watch them and critique them for 3 days. So they flew all the way to Sardinia, which is very, very expensive when you're working as a security guard or a waitress and things. And they did that just for that opportunity. And this is what people do when they're very, very hungry. Amateur actor will maybe work in Los Angeles, and then they'll audition for a play in New York, even though it doesn't pay very much. They'll get a job to do a commercial, fly to Canada. They may do like an indie film in England. I mean, they're going to do whatever it takes to get something. And then they're going to keep trying and building up their resume. And they're not going to get psyched out. They are used to rejection, and they don't give up. And they sometimes they will, get a part, and then they won't even get, be an understudy in a play or something and never get to do the acting. So, people, don't give up that succeed. And that's just what it's all about. You will keep trying, and you will keep doing whatever you can. And the harder you work and the more opportunities you have, the more likely, you are to succeed. And I don't know why. I don't know why attorneys don't necessarily follow what I'm saying. I don't think they follow it because they believe that their ego is all wound up in rejection. They believe that applying to firms without openings, this is a way to hurt their ego, or maybe it will hurt their brand in the market, meaning, people will apply to jobs and they won't get them, and maybe people will think poorly of them. Law firms, by the way, do not get a resume and think poorly of you. They get a resume and they think, oh, I can't use this person, or I don't have time to review this, whatever. It's nothing to do with you. And they're certainly not going to remember that you applied, and it's going to hurt your brand. It's just crazy. So, if the market doesn't appreciate you or give you positive feedback that you desire, a lot of people will become depressed. I see depressed attorneys all the time. I see them, they move home, or they stay at home, or they take these jobs, or they stop searching for a job, or they often change careers. And sometimes when all this comes to an end, it's very, very common, very, very common. And I've seen this happen to numerous men. A man will get a job in a good law firm and will work there for, 6 or 7 years. He will buy a house, he will start a family, and then all of a sudden, because he's too senior or whatever, the law firm lays him off or lets him go, and he can't find another job. And because he can't find another job, he's not supporting his family. Because he's not supporting his family, he's angry. His wife is insecure. He's very upset, and often the stuff, very, very often, it leads to divorce. And you have to, in this kind of situation. This happens, by the way, extremely common. I mean, I come across this situation probably when I talk to people, once a month. I mean, it's just very, very common. So let me just tell you a little bit about the job search process that the attorneys go through. So they think about all these things about themselves that should happen. They think that because the people that they went to school with are doing something, because their family expects something, because culturally certain types of people from certain backgrounds have expectations. They have ideas of what success means. So all these things are kind of going around in their minds, and I'm sure it's just like you're going around in your mind. You're thinking, how am I comparing to other people I went to school with? How am I comparing to other people in the firm I'm working with? How am I comparing to what my family expects of me? How am I doing this? How am I doing that? And it's all something that will drive you crazy if you keep, using your ego to define yourself and what other people think you should be. And you want to be praised for your work. You want to be feeling significant, which is a big deal. Everybody, by the way, has a need for significance, meaning they want to feel like they're important. They want to feel like there's something about them that's very good. They want to think that they're better than others, and they want to perceive themselves that way. And you are like that too. I mean, everybody is comparing themselves, is competitive, and has this ego that they want to kind of build up. And I think more than anyone in most professions, attorneys want to feel significant. They want to win cases. They want to get the best side of the deal. They want to be praised for what they do. They want to have judges like them. They want to, their whole sense of being is filled up with this kind of competitiveness and wanting to feel praised. And I will tell you that in almost every law firm out there, you may get some praise early in your career when you're making the money, but it's not about praise. I mean, you have to have an ego that's very, very strong. It's not about getting every job you apply to. It's not about any of that. It's about how you manage those feelings in order to push forward. You don't allow yourself to feel badly about yourself because you're not getting praised and told how great you are. And if you base your self-worth on that, it's absolutely crazy, because it has to do with the market. It has to do with your practice area. It has to do with where you are. All these factors are influencing what's happening to you, and you cannot control them. Like I said earlier, you can control your resume. Please, please, please watch my resume review videos. You can control your resume, and you can control how many places you apply to and not giving up. Those are the things that are in your control. And you can control applying to other markets where there may not be a lot of people that do. But if you're basing your ego on all these different things, you're going to feel separated. You're going to feel, not good about yourself. It's all these problems that will happen. And, I saw, in the first firm I worked in, I saw so many people that were very, very serious about kind of measuring themselves in relation to others. And those people, a lot of them didn't succeed. They got to the point where they thought they succeeded and didn't, had all these problems. They had health problems, they had drinking problems, they had drug problems, they had all these sorts of things where they were numbing the pain of their ego feeling rejected. And it's very, very hard. I mean, it's very, very hard when you put, that when you're like that, it affects attorneys at all levels that compare themselves to others, and they feel inferior, and their egos are hurt, and they get down, and and they'll often they'll withdraw from the market because they're not getting that validation. So think about this, right? So you're an attorney, you're applying to jobs, and you're throwing your resume in the hat with everybody that has a LinkedIn account and everyone that has works on Indeed or whatever, and you're not getting validation. And so you start to feel poorly about yourself. You start to feel like you're a failure. You start to feel like, you shouldn't be in the legal profession. You start to feel like you need to take jobs that are beneath you. And I will say, I want to make this point real quickly, is what's a job that's beneath you? A job that's beneath you is anything that doesn't have any sort of future associated with it. So being a staff attorney, typically, unless there's certain reasons like you're raising a family or something as opposed to an associate, is not a good career choice. Working as a contract attorney is not a good career choice to get validated. You need to be in a situation where you have the possibility of advancing and doing very well. People start their own practices all the time, and they work very, very hard to get clients, and that provides them validation. But they may start a practice and do market and market and market and not get any results for months or longer. But they keep pushing forward. And you'll see that with most successful attorneys. They keep pushing. They don't go off the rails. They may, you don't want to get depressed and confused about your life because of all this stuff. It's not a good use of your life force. It's not. You have to push your life force into continuing, into going forward, no matter what happens. I'm going to tell you how to do that today. So I think it's interesting for me. I bring up this example a lot, but I think it's very, very important to understand. So I see two types of people. I see people that start their legal careers doing something in a law firm or whatever, and then they just kind of go off the rails and they go in-house, or they do things that are going to maybe make it more difficult for them to stay employed in the future. If you go in-house, by the way, most in-house jobs don't last very long because the need for attorneys inside of companies changes. When a new CEO comes in, or the company experiences financial problems, or a new CEO comes in and wants his own legal department, they're very, very dangerous. But what I see is I see attorneys all over the country, in Nebraska and outside of major cities, that didn't go to good law schools, and they will start practicing law in a smaller market. And then if you look at them, 5, 10, 20 years later, they're still working in a law firm. They're happy as you can be as a lawyer. They're working in a smaller market. They're supporting their family. They have stability. But a lot of times, the attorneys that start out in the largest markets and the best firms don't end up practicing law, don't end up happy. I don't know why that is, but you're actually much more likely to drop out of the practice of law if you went to a top law school and started your career in a major market. Now, you can obviously have a lot more success working in large firms, and if you do well there, which a lot of people do, obviously, otherwise we would be partners and you can make a ton of money. But in general, you take 50 people that start out in a small market, and you take 50 people to great law schools and started out in a major market. Maybe 30 of the people that went, or 40 of the people that didn't go to the best law schools and work in small markets are still practicing 10 or 20 years later. And the people from the largest, going to the largest firms, aren't. So, maybe 20 of them or 10. So it's just something to think about. Like your ego, when you're surrounded by the most successful, the hardest working, the best qualified people, is your ego is constantly comparing and contrasting. Whereas when you're in a smaller market, that's just not happening as much. So, if you're in New York, there's an incredible pecking order of firms the people are very, very aware of in terms of the prestige level. And it's just a complete different way of looking at things. And so, there's just a lot of competition, a lot of ego, and people are judging themselves a lot of times on exterior focus. And if you're emphasizing your ego, constantly aware of what other people are doing, comparing yourselves, and you feel like you can't get up, or you can't compete, then often you will just drop out or something because you're not getting that positive feedback that you need. And what does that mean? I mean, I've seen the situations that it's just crazy. Like I had a woman whose husband, she was practicing in a major New York law firm, and her husband and family had to relocate to Rochester, New York. I don't know the reasons for it, but she had to leave her job in New York City and go to Rochester, New York. And so she got to Rochester, New York, and she got a couple offers from good firms there. But then she turned them down, and I was like, "Why are you turning these down?" And she said, "Because I don't. It's embarrassing, like for me to have to go to a firm of this caliber, and they were the best firms in Rochester. And what would people think of me? It's a move down, and so I would rather not work than work at one of these firms." So literally, the ego so involved that the person ended up dropping out of the law completely because they didn't think that they would measure up to people that she'd spent several years practicing with. I mean, this is insane that this happens. I mean, think about that. That's an example of the ego. And you don't need to think about your ego. You need to think about, how am I going to succeed? Where's my best opportunity? What's going to work for me? And again, people leave the practice of the law because of their egos. And I will tell you that this ego penetrates everything. I mean, it penetrates, how you feel about the firm you're at. It penetrates everything. So, it's very, very difficult for people when they involve their ego because they don't understand, what these market forces are. And then they often will call off their job search or whatever when things are not working out for them. So can you imagine if someone that wanted to be a actor, actor did this? Can you imagine, why them doing this? Because they don't. I mean, most of them don't become successful. Some, but most people, a lot of people out there, probably you, are measuring yourself based on other people, how other people are doing, how other people might perceive you, and people want to be perceived in a certain way. And it's crap. When you talk to a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs, I mean, you have things like, I don't think he drives one anymore, but Warren Buffett driving the same pickup truck he's driven for 30 years or 40 years. You have all these examples of people like that don't need to be perceived in any type of way to feel good about themselves. You don't need to have a Porsche to feel good about yourself. You don't need to live in the best neighborhood to be, to feel good about yourself. You don't need to wear the most expensive clothes to feel good about yourself. But this is what people do. You're probably not going to be doing it when you're in your 70s or 80s, but they do it when they're very, very young and also older because they want to be perceived as a certain thing, as successful as whatever it is. And even to the New York, the restaurants you go to, and I mean, it's crazy. And, if the less you do this, the better off you're often going to be. So, you don't ever tie your ego to your job search. You have to just be persistent. You have to realize that if you are in a profession for 60 years, just because you're having some bumps in the road, it's a learning experience. I mean, it'll make you often appreciate what you have when you get something, work harder, improve, and all these things about persistence. And you just have to do it. I talk a lot about in these webinars, motivational type things like that you can do to get yourself motivated. You can watch videos. You can do all these things. You can read books. I like Think and Grow Rich. That's out of it's an old book, so there's no copyright anymore. You can look it up and read it for free. But there's a very, very good chapter in there about persistence that I would recommend reading. It's all about persistence, having a goal. And when you have a goal and you're persistent, everything will fall into place for you. But most people don't. Have to be persistent, and you just cannot give up. So, I've talked. It seems like I'm kind of beating this point over and over your head, but I'm doing so because you're making this mistake if you're not going out in the market, if you're not applying, to as many possible places as you can. And if your happiness is dependent on being validated, whether it's people hiring you or how you look to others, and it's just very, very hard. And it's hard because most attorneys, you're in debt from law school. You've gotten positive feedback in jobs before, and nobody wants you. It's very, very difficult, and especially for people that may have gotten constant praise when they were good students in college and law school, and their parents have praised them. teachers and society. And so they got all this positive feedback. And then you go into the practice of law and maybe you end up in a good firm and maybe you don't. But then you keep wanting that validation. And you keep wanting to feel praised or look good in the eyes of others. Even, people wanting to look good in the eyes of others is crazy. So people go to a large firm and they'll work 3,000 hours a year and just sit there and just destroy themselves because they look good to others that they're practicing at this, big firm or whatever it is. And you don't, people are going through all this kind of stuff. So, it's the ego again. You don't need that feedback. You don't need to, feel anything about it. Let me just go through some of these slides because I don't want to keep repeating myself. Yeah. So their ego will drive them often to do everything they can to be a partner in a law firm. So they will judge their future self-worth on this, and they will spend a decade of their life in an office to try to do that. And market forces will determine what happens. I run up against, I know one attorney that's pretty famous, actually. I'm not going to say her name, but she was at this great law firm, Cooley Godward, and she was in her 10th year or something like that, up for partner. And she had billed massive hours, done really, really good work, believed that she was going to be a partner. And this is from what she said. I don't know that this really happened. I'm assuming it did, but she didn't make partner. And I was working with her, like trying to place her in law firms. And she actually got an offer from a pretty good firm. And then but not a firm anywhere near the caliber of Cooley, but it was a decent national firm. And so when she was up for partner, they didn't make her a partner. They came into her office and they were just like, "You're not making partner." And the way she told it is they just asked her to leave, like after 10 years. Now, and she did. She just walked off the job. I don't know if she was fired, she walked off and didn't have a job. And then she had this job from this other national firm that didn't hit the same brand. And then she turned down the job because she thought it was below her. But, was that the right decision? Yes, because she started her own firm that now has like 20 or 30 people that's doing major work. And I see her on the news all the time because she's in San Francisco. She's on Fox News and these kind of conservative, talking from a conservative point of view a couple of times a week. So, she had this happen to her and kept persisting, knew what she wanted and succeeded. So, it's a very, very difficult profession, regardless of what level you're at. And like I said, you often have more safety. Your ego is less involved when you're working in smaller markets and smaller firms as opposed to larger firms. And, the ego is wound up in the brand name of the firm. It's just all this sort of stuff that people cling to their entire careers. And when things don't go well, they blame it on themselves or whatever. And, and they don't do well because of that. So we see, you can succeed regardless of who you are. So even if you're, I had this thing that happened to me very early in my career. When I started, legal newspapers, like printed newspapers were very popular. People weren't going online as much. And I had this thing happen where I don't know why I did it. The paper had this ad for where you would list yourself as a recruiter and put in a couple lines about what you did. And so I said, I'm a specialist in working with older attorneys without business. I don't know why I said that, but to this day, I don't know why I wrote that, but I did. And I got all these people that came to me, these older attorneys that were unemployed and had essentially given up. And I was the only recruiter out there that had anything like that on my bio. And so I got all these calls, and these are people that had given up. And then that they were persistent. They called me. They met with me. In one case, one flew out to meet me. And incredibly, most of them I was able to get jobs for when everybody, including themselves, had almost given up. And so, this type of persistence, finding these opportunities, and how did I place them? I sent them to a ton of different places. I dressed up their resumes. I gave them pep talks before interviews, and they did well. So, you can, as a senior associate in a lot of law firms, or, you can make incredible amount of money. You can, often, even if you're getting that feedback, you may not feel good about yourself. And, and you need to, when you get going in your career, like when are 1 or 2 years in, or you're think about what you're doing, every year you're in an attorney, there's fewer and fewer people like you. So if you go to a law school and it's not a great law school and a couple of people make get jobs in big firms and there's 80 people, a few years out, there may be none of them. And it's just, if you're able to stay employed anywhere for a long period of time, that's a very, very good achievement. Because if you take your class of people that you graduated from law school with and you start going forward year after year after year, there's going to be fewer people that are like you. So you just have to put yourself in a situation where you feel good about yourself. So people may be depressed because they're just counsel in a major New York law firm. They're the non-equity partner. But if you're in a big city, you can compare yourself. You should realize that if you're in a smaller market, you would be much more better received. So you feel good about yourself for those reasons, even though that is kind of the case. So the ego. Like I joined my first firm out of law school, and I was amazed that almost every male partner in the law firm had been divorced at least once. And then why was that? It's because they were competitive. They wanted to go the most hours. They wanted to work on the biggest cases, and their entire life became wrapped up in that and feeling good about themselves and getting positive feedback for that. So I'm not going to talk too much more about ego because I don't want to talk too much about it. But you really can't do anything that's going to numb how you feel about yourself. People, it's so competitive that people will drink too much. They'll I knew a very successful partner in a law firm that I was friends with, and he'd come home every night and smoke pot for 2 hours. I mean, just to kind of numb the pain. And it's what happens. So, and there's just so many factors that impact your ability to get employed. All these different things with the market. So, practice areas stop, the economy stops, all these sorts of things. And so I keep coming back to the example of actors. But when things happen, like they're happening now, I would guess that on this call today, on this webinar, and by the way, it's a live webinar, so take questions after. You can also raise your hand, and we're not too far from completing it. But an actor, actress, when a play ends or whatever happens, they don't simply, stop working. They start looking for other places to go and work. They'll visit, potential jobs in England, Canada. It doesn't matter. And, so, you have to think too about the geographies. Like, if you're limiting yourself to one area of the country when you're doing your job search, that's not a good move. Like, imagine if a professional actor said they're only going to work in Chicago. I mean, what is that going to do to their career? So it's the same thing with you. You say to yourself, I'm only going to work in this city, or I'm only going to work, I don't know, in this type of firm. And you need to go and get, whatever people do. I had one guy, I spoke to him a couple months ago, and he's from Australia, and he got a job in a major New York law firm as a 15th year attorney doing capital markets. His wife lived in New York with him, and they made a lot of money, and they lived in there. But all of a sudden, his job, they let him go, which happens all the time. If you're a senior attorney in law business, let him go, or work slow down, whatever. And the market was bad, but I got him an interview in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he said, I don't want to work in Grand Rapids. I only want to work in New York. And he could have gotten this job had he gotten an interview, but he didn't. He said, I only want to work in New York. I only want a big major firm. And so when he didn't get the job, I don't know exactly what happened. But, actually, he had nothing, was basically unemployable because he didn't take this opportunity in a smaller town, which Grand Rapids, by the way, is very nice. Anyway, there's good firms there because there's some big companies there, close by Kellogg's and Herman Miller. And there's big companies, Steelcase. And so he didn't take the job. And because he didn't take the job, he was unemployed. And he actually had to go back to Australia, leaving his family because he didn't want to keep his career on track. He thought he should be working only, in big firms in New York. And that hurt. So all this stuff about the attorneys, market seizing out, people getting upset. I had a thing happen to me that was very sad. I remember it years ago. And I didn't do a good job for this candidate. And he was an 8th or 9th year attorney at a big firm, not a big firm, like a mid-sized firm in New York City. And he was a litigator. And this firm he was at was pretty good, and not, mid-sized firm, just with one office in New York. And he lost his job. And so he had a certain amount of time to get a job. And he came to me and I got him an interview in a firm, and then he didn't get the job, and he took his phone, went outside, and said, what am I going to do? Like, I don't, I didn't get this job. I don't have anything else. And he started crying. And he was like, this older attorney was crying. And he was outside, sitting on a bench or something. And I told him, well, you need to be applying to more places. You need to do this. And he said, well, why aren't I getting jobs? And I said, because you're a senior. There's just not a lot of opportunities. And started crying, and was basically giving up. And you may feel this way too, because when you're not working and all this stuff, it can be very, very hard. And so that can be, it's very, very difficult because there's all these outside forces that are shaping whether or not you're going to be able to get a position. I just, a couple things I just want to say to you that I want to make sure you understand. If you are not getting a position, and I'll talk to you and I'll give examples and tell you what to do at the end of this webinar when we start taking questions. But, everything is fixable. Like, if you're not getting a job, it's fixable. Like, it's fixable by fixing your resume. It's fixable by applying to more places. It's fixable by having geographic flexibility. I had a woman, this example before, lots of people, they lose their jobs in Palo Alto or New York or Chicago or wherever it is. And there's not any opportunities. Maybe there's something weird about their background, like they practiced for 9 months and then they haven't worked in 2 years. All of those people, regardless of who they are, can get positions because there's massive demand in areas of the country where there's not a lot of attorneys. I mean, Nebraska, very, very good market right now. Wyoming, very, very good market. Idaho, very, very good market. Now, you may think that you don't need to work in those places, but I'm telling you that there's opportunities for everyone if you're flexible and if you do, a lot of work in your search. And so I was talking to a litigator, and he was in New York, and he had been laid off from his firm. They were doing some cases related to mortgages or something, and they had a lot of attorneys there. It was a Bank of America dispute or something. And when that went away, the firm laid off like 40 attorneys. And these were good attorneys. Like, this was a big firm that hired people with great backgrounds. And so I started looking these people up. I started just seeing what happened to these people at this firm that were laid off, that had gone to Harvard and all this sort of stuff. I decided to go onto LinkedIn and look them up. And I don't know how I was able to do it, but I was able to find a lot of these people that were laid off. And the majority of them just stopped practicing law. One became a professional traveler. Some were working in one administrative role, selling insurance, career counselor. It's just like people just take this negative stuff that happens to them and they give up. And all of these attorneys, I mean, if you go to Harvard or something and you're working at a big firm, you're obviously employable. I found another one that was doing DUIs and divorces. I mean, it was astonishing. How do you go from the apex of the legal profession to something else that has nothing to do with, practicing law anymore? And it's just, I don't like to see this when you have people that have gone to incredibly good colleges and gotten these incredibly great point averages, gone to top 10 law schools and done very well, that have interviewing skills and charisma, but, and then give up. I mean, this is what people do. They're not persistent. They give up. And a lot of it has to do with not having goals, not knowing exactly what they want out of life. If you don't know what you want out of life in your career, you're someone else is going to decide it for you. And I don't know if that's what you want, but it's just not a good, a good decision. So all these attorneys in Boston that lost their jobs, they decided they weren't getting other jobs because the market wasn't good. So they decided to get into all these other careers when they could have taken their experience and gone to a smaller firm that didn't have a big brand name, maybe in Boston, or they could have worked in other areas of Massachusetts, or they could have worked in other cities, and they gave up just because, this sort of thing happened. Again, take a look at the website I told you about, heroonmission.com, and then there's a book that goes along with it. This is something that can help you set your own goals and your life in terms of, what you want to do. There's no excuse for anyone to be unemployed. It's absolutely crazy because there's so many opportunities, and you can't, you can't compare yourself to others. You need to continue practicing law, or you need to get your first job and realize that, success is all about doing, different types of work, when it's popular. So what kind of work is popular? So, when mortgage rates are low and there's a lot of money flowing in the economy, often, real estate, is very much in demand. So that's a practice area. Like there was a big boom for in-house jobs doing data privacy. That's not there anymore, but that was a big boom and all these people were getting jobs. Now there's nothing like that anymore. And different practice areas are in demand at different points in time. So, you have to, understand that, everything is never about you. It's about outside forces and what you're able to do. Job. Okay, we have about other things. That's fine. Yeah, market. I've kind of talked about that already, but I just want you to understand that anytime there's a slowdown in the market, it doesn't mean you should give up. It's never your fault. So I'll conclude this. I will take questions about this, but my biggest point to you is that I know that you may be in a position right now where you're frustrated. I know that you may be depressed about the market and not getting jobs. I know that it may cause financial pressure for you with your family. I know that you may wonder, like, why did I get into this profession if I'm getting all this negative feedback? I know that you may have done everything you possibly can to get a position. I know that you may have come over from another country and gotten an LLM and are trying to get a position. I know all these things, and I know that the problem is persistence. I've had two of them happen, but LLM programs. So LLM programs, people sign up for them. They will, they come from other countries. They may spend over $100,000 in a year of their life getting an LLM, and then they may think, I want to get a job in a big firm. Well, this is crazy. So you may have like 100 LLMs, 50 LLMs coming out of an LLM program from another country. I'm just going to tell you what these people do wrong. So they come over and they know that starting salaries of attorneys. And so they think that if they get this LLM, they should be able to get a job in a big firm. And so they don't, and then they give up. And after taking the bar and all this stuff, and then they put their tail between their legs and go home. So this happens to thousands of people each year. And when I talk to these people in these LLM programs, it's just crazy to me because all they will do is apply to these big firms. They will get rejected, and of course they're getting rejected. I mean, they never got their JD. There's nothing to measure them by based on their class performance in an LLM program. Law firms don't want to sponsor them. All these things. So they just apply these big firms and give up when the simple solution, and this is your solution too, the simple solution is not to chase the market. And I want to explain what that means. Like if you're trying to get these jobs and they're just kind of moving away from you and you're chasing the market and no one's hiring you, you have to figure out, how am I going to make the market chase me? Like, what do I need to do? And the only way to do that is to apply to places that need attorneys. And those are going to be in smaller cities. Those are going to be solo practitioners and small firms that are going to have an interest in you because no one else is applying. So you need to make the market chase you and not the other way around. And that's what people do. They chase the market and nothing good, ever happens. And, they worry about getting rejected. They worry about, what that means to them. They worry all this sort of stuff and they quit. And I just, what does quitting mean? Quitting means applying to 100 places and getting rejected and giving up. Quitting means applying to 300 places and giving up. Quitting means putting yourself and applying to places where there's going to be more attorneys than you for jobs. Like, this is a funny thing. So attorneys come to BCG, and when they come, they always indicate where they want to work. So I don't care where they are. They could be in California, they could be in Florida, they could be, I don't know, anywhere. And they always, a lot of them, let's say 10, 20% will always say, oh, I'm also interested in working in Washington, D.C. Because they know that in Washington, D.C., it's very easy to wade into the bar. And that particular choice of trying to wade into Washington, D.C. is just nonsense. I mean, because you're putting yourself into a market where there's already an oversupply of attorneys. There are so many attorneys in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's like a percentage. I mean, it's like 10% of professionals it's just a huge number of attorneys. So they go into this market where they're never going to get a job because they're competing with so many people that are already there. So the point to this whole webinar is, and I'm going to talk about it when we get to the questions, but the whole point of this webinar is that people give up because they make the wrong decisions. People give up because they compare themselves to others. People give up because they apply to places in the market that they're in and they don't get any positive feedback. People give up because they don't continually improve themselves, like improving their resume, like getting more experience, like whatever it is in their practice area. They just give up, and you don't have to. I mean, the benefits of staying employed in a law firm over the long term are profound because once you get experience in a law firm and you get enough, you can do all sorts of things. You can go to work in another law firm. You can get clients. You can start your own practice. You can do all these things where once you get to the point where you understand your practice area, which takes about 5 years, regardless of what you're doing. Once you get to the point where you understand your practice area, you can take that experience and you can work for the rest of your life. You can get business. You can continually improve. You can make a name for yourself in your practice area. You can do all these things once you cast your lot with a law firm and make sure that you stay employed. And you can do this for the rest of your life. I don't care if you're 60 years old, you can continue practicing if you do things right. I don't care what law school you went to, you continue practicing. So, I'd like you just to consider, the point of persistence because it will pay off. I told you earlier that if 100 people graduate from your law school, maybe 10 of them go in your practice area. After 5 years, just a few people will be left that are doing that. So it's all a race, and there's plenty of opportunity out there. If you improve yourself and become a very good attorney, good things are going to happen. I had a discussion yesterday with a law firm, and it was very sad. There was this guy that had gotten a job in a big firm in Delaware, and he had failed the bar twice, and so the firm let him go, and he was unemployed for 6 months or maybe a little bit longer. And I decided to work with him because I knew I could help him. And I got him a job with a decent sized firm in, I believe, it was Washington, D.C. Not decent, so a very small firm, 3 or 4 people, but it was someone finally gave him an opportunity. And he got there, and when he started, his work quality wasn't what it should be. And so the small firm, told him, what he was doing wrong and so forth. So once that happened to him a few times, he gave up. He stopped coming into work consistently. He didn't turn in the stuff on time. So instead of taking the negative feedback in a positive way, yesterday I had a call with the firm. And even though it cost me, because I placed him probably $25,000 if he left, or the firm fired him, I told the firm, he's obviously given up and shouldn't be an attorney anymore. And you have to let him go. When you're representing clients, like, if you're a criminal attorney or you're a personal injury attorney, I mean, if you want to help them, you wouldn't give up. You wouldn't give up. And it needs to be the same thing with your career. You just cannot ever give up. And, this talk today is supposed to be inspirational. I'm going to talk to you about the reasons you shouldn't give up. I'm going to talk to you about how I can help you if you don't want to give up at our business, for example, some services we offer. But the most important thing for you is just being persistent and not giving up. And again, like the attorney I told you about that got criticism, he took that and felt like he never would succeed and threw in the towel in a law firm when they were giving him an incredible opportunity. Okay, so we'll take a quick break just for a minute or two, and then we'll come back and I'll do questions. When I do questions, it's important for, you should ask whatever questions you have. So the more questions you ask, the better. All of your questions, by the way, and the answers you give will help other people because most people are afraid to ask questions. Your questions are anonymous. If you're logged into Zoom, then you think I'm going to share your name, I won't. So whatever questions that you have that I can help you with, I certainly would, hope you ask questions because it helps a lot of people. You can ask questions about things related to this webinar, or you can ask questions about things that aren't related. And I am going to show everyone how to get a job, regardless of who you are, when you feel like you're being rejected. I'll show you the formula. It's very simple. It works all the time. And then we'll kind of go from there. So I'll do a quick break, not very long, just like a couple of minutes. And then when I come back, we'll do questions. I want to, first of all, I want to congratulate you. I want to congratulate you because most people out there don't take the time to learn and to understand this sort of stuff. And so, have almost 1,000 people on this webinar right now, and actually people didn't get in because we only 1,000 started, and most of you are still here. Very, very few people. When you think about the 700,000 attorneys, whoever that received notice about the webinar, very few people will actually go and learn and try to improve themselves. And that's the first. I congratulate you. Are persistent. You are a very small group of people out there that are willing to improve themselves, and it's very, very powerful because
that's exactly what it takes to succeed, is your ability to improve yourself and learn this sort of information, and then it will rewire your brain in terms of how you care. So I'm hoping today that I have helped you stay employed and never give up and always have a job in the law firm. And if I've done that, I've succeeded. So we'll take a quick break. I'll be back in like 1 or 2 minutes. And when I come back, we'll do questions. Thank you. All right. So we are almost ready to go. Questions? And I think, in addition to everything that you've learned today, I feel like questions are often the most important part of the webinar, because this is where, in addition to what I've said, that we get to learn from what other people, their concerns and so forth, that they have about, their careers and things that will hopefully change the course of your careers. In a second here, questions and answers. I'll share second questions. Sorry, just give me a second. I'm trying to figure out which one. Okay, questions and answers. And again, please ask questions. Like the more in depth you can ask. And I will, as part of this presentation, which I think will be very, very helpful to you, I'll tell you exactly what you should be doing to get a position. Question. I've been told by recruiters that aiming too high with the firms, that I'm maybe aiming too high with the firms I'm targeting. Should I lower my expectations? There is a way to fine tune my approach to appeal to more competitive firms. How can I tell when it's a matter of my qualifications versus the presentation of my application materials? Okay, so that's a good question. So people think they may be aiming too high. Yes, if you're applying to colleges and you think I'm only going to go to Yale or Stanford or Princeton or something, that's not probably a good idea. Like everyone that applied to colleges, even if you think you can get into Yale, Harvard, or Stanford, you always have to have what are called safety schools. So you have to try to be applying to places that you have a better chance of getting into versus ones that are going to be difficult for you or may just be a crapshoot. So when you're applying to the largest law firms, you're competing with everyone that has qualifications that may be better or similar to you. So when I do the resume webinars, which I did last week, which I encourage everyone, please watch it, because it can profoundly help you if you understand your resume has to be focused on one practice area. It has to look like there's some sort of upward mobility. It has to stand out for your experience being focused in that practice area that they're hiring. And that's the best you can do. But, everyone wants to work in the best firms. And just because you can't get a job in a good firm now, doesn't mean you can't later. So what does that mean? So say you're 6 years out or 7 years out of school or whatever, and you started practicing, corporate law in a smaller firm. Well, as you get experience, things like your grades and so forth are going to fall back. They're not going to be important anymore. It's going to be based on your experience when you're young and maybe about your law school or your grades and things. But when you have that experience, you're going to be much better off. A recruiter will generally only target the largest firms. Sometimes they may have some smaller ones. What I would say is that if you are talking to recruiters, it's a good idea. I mean, we have pretty much every potential job, but some recruiters may have jobs that we would be a good fit for with other recruiters for. But I don't think you should always be trying to get positions in the large firms. This is what everyone else does. And people think that if they don't get that there's something wrong with them. That's just absolutely not the case. It's just much, much harder to get jobs in the largest firms than it is in smaller ones. What does that mean, flexibility? So flexibility means a lot of things. It means markets. It means size of the firm. It means locations. It means just a ton of things. So I want to show you. I'll show you an example in BCG, which I think is quite interesting and will help you. But this example right now, let me just go here. BCG is what do you do when you're looking for a job and you don't feel like you're getting any results? Let me just pulling up a sample thing. Let me see what it's called. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen right now and just show you some things about like what do you do when you feel like you may not when you feel like you may not be getting a lot of jobs. So let me just make sure I have this correctly. Okay, so these are demo accounts. So all that means is this is demo. It's not a real account. So let's take a look at Harrison Barnes. So Harrison Barnes here is a labor and employment associate. This resume, by the way, is actually pretty good, how they're describing what they do. So I'm a labor and employment associate, and I'm looking in Los Angeles and San Francisco for a position. Okay, so I'm going to show you how does the typical person look for a position. So we're looking for jobs here. These are jobs in BCG, and I'm just showing you this because I want to show you how you could improve your search. So these are all the jobs that we currently have. We have certain jobs here that are what are called job orders, meaning these firms have reached out to us, and this is a sample account that are places that potentially would be interested in you. So what I'll do typically, if this person's a really good candidate, we rank firms, they will look at these other firms like Brockman Gonzalez and Donahue Fitzgerald and Employees First Labor Law. They'll look at all these firms, and typically what they'll do is only apply to these firms. I'll just show you here. They'll only put themselves out for the largest and the most prestigious firms. So that means that they'll only apply to these firms because they think that they're special and they should only be working in the best firms. Now, you can see here that there's a lot of opportunity. You have right here, this is just openings in BCG. But if this person did what we're doing and they went out and investigated where all the jobs are, they would have all of these options of places that they potentially work. And then, but if they looked at the smaller to mid-sized firms, so let's just take a look here. These are rankings that I'm not going to explain it to you, but I'm showing you all the opportunities out there. Then they would have all of these firms as well. So a lot of people, when they're searching for jobs, are not searching everywhere they could possibly work. And because they're not doing that, they're making a lot of mistakes. But this is an example of all the opportunities that if I was a labor and employment firm, a candidate that I could be applying to. And most people won't. Most people will take a list like this, and when I send them the firm, especially if they're a really good candidate, and we'll take this list and they will only apply to these firms. Only, and they'll choose, they'll say, oh, I want to work at Jones Day or DLA Piper, and they'll only choose the largest firms for them to work at. And that's not a good way of looking for a job. So let me just give you another example here real quickly, because I want to show you what can also happen. So say that let's take a practice area where there's not a lot of work. So you can see there's all these different types of practice areas and so forth, and there's hundreds of them. But let's say I was in a practice area, and I'm just going to put this down here, and I'm going to get rid of all this labor and employment. Where's that? All right, let's do that. So healthcare law transaction. I'm just showing you an example of how to, what the level of opportunities are out there. So now you look at, oops, you know what, I screwed up here. I didn't change the practice here. The final practice here. So taking off employment, I'm just showing you an example, and I'm going to put in healthcare. So there's healthcare general, there's healthcare compliance. And this example will make sense in a second. So now we go into this person's account, my sample account, and we look at the number of jobs. And you go in here, and there's much fewer places you could apply to. And these are healthcare jobs that are open in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So you can see here that this person suddenly went from, they were in a labor employment practice here, they suddenly went to a position where there's only a few openings. So typically this person will go in here and they may apply to Foley, maybe Hooper Lundy, which is a very good labor employment firm, and a couple of these firms, and they will get rejected because there's not a lot of, there's more applicants in them. Maybe a firm in San Francisco is going to prefer to hire someone already in San Francisco. So they will apply to these firms, the only openings right now in the market, and they will reach a conclusion that they're not marketable before validating themselves. So then you go here and you may look, we have another source of jobs, which is kind of interesting. And if you're not a member of it, again, I'm selling something, but Law Crossing has jobs that you're not going to find elsewhere. So this firm had found this job that BCG didn't have. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity. So what does this person do? So they apply to these firms, they apply to healthcare openings. There's not any openings. They get rejected and they feel badly about themselves and that the market is really tight and all these sorts of things. But that's really not the case. So we do this on BCG, which is kind of interesting. And I'm not trying to bore people with this information, but it's actually very relevant. Going here, now we can look at firms that have had healthcare openings in the past. You can go into Law Crossing. Law Crossing has something called the Law Crossing Archives, which are jobs that firms have had in the past. It's a very, very good source of information because if you apply to firms that had openings in the past, there's a possibility that they might in the future. So I would take all these firms, I would plug these firms into the person's account, and then I would urge them to apply to there. They probably wouldn't, like jobs are expired. So how much opportunity is there in these markets? If you want to do healthcare law, it's huge. So this is just an example. Now these are firms that we work with at BCG. So, this is a huge number of firms. So what if this person, this is what I would do. What if this person applied to, instead of just the 4 or 5 openings for healthcare attorneys, or whatever, that was 10, what if they applied to 88 firms and didn't give up? What would happen then? Like, that would increase their chances. But most people aren't going to do this. Most people,
that have all these firms in their account that we give them a BCG will not apply to these firms because they're afraid of applying to places without openings. But this is exactly where the opportunities are. Look, Garner Health Law Corporation, it looks like all these people do is healthcare law. So if someone were to find this firm and apply to them, and they were a healthcare attorney, they would have a pretty good chance because they're applying to places that don't have openings that could help them. And then, there's just all these other things, people can do. So, you can do a search and here I found another 24 firms that do this type of work, and I have all these resources, but I'm just showing you firms that I'm finding. And this, again, you take this and you expand it to all these other practice areas and now, other locations. Now you've got 30 firms. So just in the space of, 5 minutes, I've taken someone that has experience where there's only like 6 or 7 jobs, and I found for them like 150 other places they can apply to. And that's a pretty significant number of additional places. And this person too is only interested in Los Angeles and San Francisco. Those are, that's like, this is where I'm going to work. I want to work in big cities. I'm, geared towards that. But what if the person, I'll just show you another thing that's kind of interesting. What if the person decided they were going to look for a job in the entire state of California because they thought that they really wanted to get a job. So what if this person, instead of just Los Angeles and San Francisco, decided they want to do the entire state of California? So now you look at jobs all over California. So instead of, I think there were 7 or 8 before, and now you've got maybe a few more. You've got one in Sacramento, which probably you'd have a pretty good chance of getting because there's not a lot of competition in Sacramento. And there's one in, you see that. So then you go in there, you also look at what are called recommended jobs, and you've got 176 places now that you can apply to that have those, that practice area. And this, by the way, is something you can do on your own. You can go in and you can search for positions all over the state you're in. So if I do just the entire state of California, I'm getting, these 30 matches. There's so much opportunity out there. And then you could do, just give you an example, healthcare law firms, California. Do that, all of a sudden you're getting all of these lists in different places you can apply. You can see BCG has firms, and then you go in here and you're going to find hundreds and hundreds of firms that do this practice area. So, staying on this call and watching this, I think could change the whole direction of your career, because once you understand how many opportunities are out there, you no longer need to be dependent on just jobs. You have to go and look at lots and lots of things. And so I've shown you right now that this geographic flexibility in your practice area and also finding all the firms that do the type of work are something that's going to make it much, much easier for you to be able to find a position when you're looking for one. Give me 1 second. I have to do something back in a second. I apologize for that. Okay. So just understanding what I talked about, you have to understand the number of opportunities there are out there that you're not finding, searching on, you're doing a comprehensive search. If you're working with a recruiter, by the way, not to knock recruiters, but recruiters are only working with the firms most of the time that they have contracts with, that have contacted them, or they're saying, I need this type of attorney. So if there's 300 practice areas and one recruiter or one little recruiting firm, they can't possibly know about the entire market. They're only knowing about a few jobs here and there. When in reality, if you're applying to everything you can find in the market that does your practice area, instead of working with a few firms that the recruiter's given you, you can expand that list to hundreds. And that's what I do for my candidates. So you take a candidate and you find every single opportunity for them in the market. And once you do that, they're able to get jobs. And you can do this yourself. There's no reason that you can't find all these positions. And I'll talk to you in a little bit about how we can help you with that. Let me see. Here's another good question. So this question is, give me 1 second. It's a great question. This question is, I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, so this question is another good question. The person says, should I take a job in a field that I don't particularly want to work in just for the sake of having a job to look to transition? Or should I keep trying to find a job in my field of choice, recent law school graduate? Okay, so there's a couple important points to understand when anybody's searching for a position, whether or not, especially as a recent graduate. So a lot of the kind of jobs you're going to be able to qualify for when you come out of school, you have 2 types of firms. You have firms that work for companies, meaning, companies pay them to work. And then you have consumer-facing firms, which are, firms that work for individuals. So what does that mean? So you have all sorts of choices of practice areas. So let me show you that real quick. Screen up. Practice area choices. Okay, so when you come out of school or you're a young attorney or whoever you are, you have the following choices. You have different practice areas that you can go into. So I'm showing you right now. So if you edit this candidate or edit final practice areas. Okay, so these are an example of different practice areas, and it's important, regardless of the stage of your career you're in, to understand the opportunity in different practice areas. So a practice area like construction or corporate is working for companies or people with money. Same thing with data privacy. Criminal law, you're working for individuals. Energy, oil, and gas for companies. Entertainment, individuals. Environmental land use, you can see all these different environmental related type of practice areas. You're working for companies. Risk, you're working for companies. Family law, you're working for individuals. So you have that choice. So when you come out of law school, you can work, or when you're any attorney, any level of experience, you have the choice of working for a company type firm or to a consumer facing firm. So obviously, I mean, you should understand that if you're trying to work in a practice area that works with companies, that's where there's the most competition, because companies have a lot of money to spend. So law firms are expected to hire the best people. If you're working for consumer facing firms or for individuals, those individuals do not have a lot of money to spend, and therefore they are, it's maybe not the practice area you want to go into. So if you're coming out of school or you're an attorney and you say, I want to do company facing work, you're probably not going to be able to get a job in a major city doing that, because you're competing with too many people that may have gone to the best law schools and so forth. Real estate's an example of company facing work. So all these type of practice areas where you may be working for a company. So what does someone do if they, and again, I keep bringing this up because I want to make sure everybody understands what I'm talking about. What do you do if you are trying to work in a company facing practice area? Well, what you do is you go and you find places that are likely to hire you that don't have a lot of competition. So say you're in Los Angeles. No, you don't search in Los Angeles. You search, in smaller areas where other people are trying to work. So Bakersfield, corporate Bakersfield is not a great place for law. You search in Bakersfield where there's not a lot of competition. So you go here and you can see, you have all these people in Bakersfield that do corporate related work. So you apply to smaller markets where there's no competition. I mean, everything in your career, you need to, and this is a basic rule that should govern how you think about things. Everything is about supply and demand. So, where are there fewer people like you? Where are there fewer people trying to do something? If you put yourself in a market where there's a better supply than you, then you're never going to get a job. At least if you're not aiming for the right firms, maybe you can find a solo practitioner or something that will hire in a smaller market. But you often have to go to markets where the supply and demand. There's always going to be a need in most markets. It's much easier to get a position with a consumer-facing law firm than to work for an individual. So you have to decide your practice area that way. But if you're a young attorney and you're in a major market and you want to do corporate or real estate or one of these practice areas, it's going to be much tougher because there's always going to be more competition and more money. So firm that's doing company-facing work, there's always more money. So companies can spend more money. So more money equals more competition for jobs. And then here with individuals, there's when you're working for individuals, it's less money and less competition. So you should always think about that when you're looking for a position. Do I try to get a position with a consumer-facing firm, or do I try to get one with a company-facing firm? And by the way, you can often make a lot more money by doing consumer-facing work than in the long run if you're doing personal injury or whatever than when you're doing company type work. For the people that don't go to the best law schools, your options generally are going to be working for consumer-facing firms first. If you want to work for company type firms, then you're going to need to often look in a smaller market. Okay, so this is a good question. This person says, what interview preparation advice do you have for people who have never interviewed at a law firm? Let's find something here for you. Give me 1 second. And I will give everyone here a short course in interviewing. Okay, so I don't know if you can find this guide on BCG, but I'll spend a little bit of time talking to you about interviewing in law firms. Now, I'm not going to talk about Zoom. Zoom, a lot of your interviews are going to be there. Anytime you interview, you want to dress up, or those just basic things. When you interview with a law firm, you always want to kind of understand the work they're doing and why you want to do that. And these are kind of the questions people are asking when they're hiring you. You know, if you haven't interviewed with a law firm before, I don't know how far you are out, but the question is are you going to be able to do the type of work that they have? So you obviously, if you're interviewing a law firm, you need to come across as someone who works, is committed, can be managed, wants the job, and is likable. I mean, there's so much information on BCG that talks about how to interview. So I don't want to spend, a lot of time here talking about interviewing. But, when you're not working in a law firm, if you've made that particular career choice, it's going to be much more difficult for you to get a position compared to other people that are working in the firm. So you have to have something that makes it like you're employable at a law firm. And I will say to everyone, and this is a very important piece of advice. So I talk about in these webinars and what I do for a living, all I talk about is how do you get jobs in law firms? How do you stay employed in law firms? And the biggest piece of advice that I give anyone is when you are whatever stage of your career you're at, once you leave the law firm and you do something else, or once you start in a position that's not in a law firm. Now there's some exceptions like judicial clerkships and other things. But once you make that career choice, law firms it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to ever get another job in a law firm. And the reason is very simple, because you're not in a law firm. Law firms have certain ways of serving individuals and businesses. People become experts in a practice area. So if you've made that career choice, then it's going to be very difficult for you to get back to a law firm. I mean, it's extremely difficult for people that may have been, worked in companies and stuff to ever get back to a law firm. It's very, very rare because going off that track hurts you. You can always get a job in a law firm. I've shown you so far in this webinar all the different ways that you can get a job in a law firm and by being broad in your search, by all these different things. So I would encourage you to read a lot of the articles that I put on BCG about this. And I love some of these questions. Everyone who's asking this, I really do commend you for asking all these questions because I think there's a lot of people. Okay, I started my career in California estate planning, and I have an LLM in tax. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's a very good qualification to get as an estate planning attorney. Very, very helpful. It says a couple of years ago, I moved back to Florida and took a job in Tampa. The firm I'm currently at is mainly civil litigation firm, but I do some work in trust litigation and estate planning. I'm looking to find a position primarily in transactional estate planning. Any tips on making the switch and being successful with the new job? So actually, you are in a very good situation, an excellent situation. And anybody that started their career in estate planning, got an LLM in tax, and maybe got off path a little bit by doing some other types of work, extremely employable. Like I can place anybody that's a dedicated trust and estates attorney and is willing to look at enough firms, I can always get them a job. It is a great practice area. Why is it such a good practice area? It's very interesting. But there are trust and estates attorneys crawling out of the walls. It doesn't matter what city you're in. Everybody, any city in the country, there's going to be trust and estates attorneys. There are probably in Tampa where you're at. Let's do another search here just to show everyone of the scale of opportunity when you're in the right practice area. So in Tampa, just do a search for, Tampa, Florida, trust and estates, or lawyers. Okay. So you do that search and you've got these people, you've got these people, you've got these people, you've got all these rankings of people, you've got this person, this person, this person, this person. This BCG has rankings. Then you have all of these businesses, which are just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons, pages and pages, showing results 1 to 20 many. So if you are in trust and estates, and you're in a market like Tampa, you will have absolutely no problem. I would say your chances of not getting a job if you apply to enough places in Tampa with your background are close to 0%. I mean, someone is going to hire you. A solo practitioner will hire you. A small firm that does it will hire you because they need people like you. And this is an example, by the way, of going into a really good practice area, like a practice area where there's always going to be a demand. This person, you are extremely employable. I could get you a job, but you can get a job on your own. You certainly don't need me. You just apply to all these places that are trust and estates firms, and people will hire you. I mean, there's work. Weird things happen. I've seen someone, trust and estates attorney, like $80,000 a year, and they apply to a bunch of places, and suddenly they're making $200 just because there's so much demand. Trust and estates is an example of a very good practice area. What I like about your practice area too is that, you went and you got an LLM tax. I don't care how senior you are, how junior you are, you can get a job. Now, here you say, I do some work in trust litigation and estate planning, but mainly civil litigation.
So what I would do in this particular resume is in your resume, this goes for everybody that's doing multiple practice areas. You basically talk about the trust litigation estate planning you're doing. You don't have to provide a lot of detail about that. So you write up everything you're doing in trust estate planning in your resume, and then you talk about maybe a few of the cases you've done that aren't related, and then you have an awesome resume that talks about that. So the most important point of your resume is to show continuity in the practice area. So that is what people hire. So law firms are all specialists, and so they want to hire people that have continuity in a single practice area. So that in your particular situation, I would say you're going to have almost, not quite, but almost a 0% chance of not finding a position if you apply to enough places. It's just how it is. I mean, you have an incredible number of opportunities. Okay, in the field of compliance, oh boy, let's see this. In the field of compliance law that I work in, there are a number of industry certifications that attest to your level of experience in specific relevant areas. Most of them require passing a written exam and gaining relevant experience to qualify for the certification. However, these are not too difficult for most lawyers have not taken the time to study and write these certification exams. Would obtaining multiple certifications positioning the attorney to be a serious and more valuable asset for a law firm that practices compliance law? Would it provide more confidence to clients to deal with an attorney who has these industry certifications? Would this method help an attorney break into a bigger firm or move for an in-house large firm? Yes. So going and getting those certifications would help you tremendously. It shows an interest and a focus in something. So that focus, just like we talked about here, the trust and estates attorney, when you take those classes and pass these certifications, they do look good on your resume, and they do provide a lot of confidence to potential clients in a law firm. They'd like to see that, and it can help you. It's not going to help you break into a bigger law firm if you're currently working in a small law firm, unless you get experience in the smaller law firm doing that. So one point I want to bring up to everybody, and I think is extremely important for your career, is that you need to have a focus in one practice area. So the more focus you have, the fewer people that are going to be like you, and that will help you. So will that help you move in-house to a law firm? It's very, very difficult to move from in-house to a law firm. You've already made the career choice. You can always, whatever stage of your career you're at, you can always get a job in a law firm. There's tons of them. But would it help you move from in-house to a law firm? It would make it easier, but be very difficult. What I would do with certification like that is I would go into a law firm and I would try to get all the experience I possibly, whether it's a small or mid-sized firm. Then I would build up my resume with that experience, and that over time would help you move to a larger law firm or get clients. So, when you have a lot of experience in something like that, it can help you get clients, and those clients will help you, grow. I mean, so, obviously someone that needs compliance work is going to want to talk to someone with that type of background. Okay, so let's see here. This person has, you can only take the bar 2 times a year. The challenge is which bar exam to take to broaden your opportunities. Any suggestions? Okay, so in general, there are 2 states that have bar exams that are difficult that you need to pass in order to get a job, in order to work, and that's California and Florida. So if you're thinking about what bar exams to take, the best ones are typically California and Florida, because those bar exams, they're not that easy, and if you have that experience, it's going to be, the bar is much easier to get a job there. So California and Florida, and then of course you have a lot of people want to take New York, which is okay, but it's, I would say, much more difficult to get a job in New York. So California, Florida, and New York are kind of the 2 big ones, or the 3 big ones that people take. If you're in New York, then you also often want to take New Jersey, and people that are in New York listen to this, I know what I'm talking about. Then you have some kind of weird bars that can actually provide you a lot of opportunity if you take them. And some of those, one of those bars might be like Delaware. So in Delaware, there's not a lot of people that work in Delaware. So I spelled it wrong. But there's not a lot of people that take the Delaware bar exam. So taking that bar exam, and if you want to do corporate related work, is actually a good bar to take. So those are kind of the ones that are going to give you the most opportunities. Florida is a very good one, and California is a very good one, because in those states, they're huge. And so Florida's like a lot of lawyers. California has a lot of lawyers. New York has a lot of lawyers. And so, once you take those bar exams, you put yourself in a position to potentially work in a lot of places. I'm going to share my screen again because I'm trying to emphasize this point to everyone as the best I can. But, when you are looking for states and things to work in, so if you go to Google and you look at cities in California, this is an example, you have, it's just insane.
You have all these cities in California. So what does that mean? That means that you could work in golf, whatever the hell that is. You could work in Gardenia. You could work in Hawthorne. I mean, all these different areas, that you could work in the cities, and it's just astonishing like how many different places there are to work. So once you take a bar where there's a lot of cities and places, that gives you the opportunity to get jobs. And what most people do, they take the California bar and they try to work in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, San Diego, but they don't go to places where they can potentially get a job where other people aren't applying. So you have, if you take a look at this and you were to apply to, and here you have 4 million people. It looks like that's not all of Los Angeles. It's like over 8. But you have all these different areas where you can work, like Fresno and Riverside. No one's applying to jobs from Riverside. So taking the bar exam in California, if you are smart about your search and you're not just applying to the same firms that everyone else is, then you have a very, very good chance to get a job by approaching firms in all these different cities. No one does this. So people in California that aren't employed in Los Angeles think, oh, I need to just throw my hat in the ring with everyone else that's the 8 million people in Los Angeles, instead of thinking, why don't I, look at jobs in, some of these different cities. And there's just a lot of different cities out there that you can work in that have opportunities if you are open to looking at multiple markets, which most people aren't. So just think about if you take the California bar, there may be, I don't know what it is, but 1,000 cities with lawyers, right? So that's pretty interesting. And that gives you a lot of opportunity that you wouldn't have if you were just, in a smaller market without a lot of opportunities. A couple of suggestions I would give you also, you go where there's demand, and there is a lot of demand right now in a lot of these Midwestern cities like states like Kansas and Nebraska, Wyoming, and like all these different places. There's not a lot of attorneys that you would necessarily have to compete with. So for this year, I'm trying to pull up a map there. Give me 1 second. So this is a U.S. map right here, and it kind of shows you the different states and things where you could potentially take the bar. So again, probably thousands of cities in Texas. Louisiana is interesting because that's a very difficult bar as well. Not a lot of people take it. But if you want to be an attorney and you're thinking I'm unemployed or I want to take the bar, you kind of have all these options of places where there's not a lot of attorneys to compete with. Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho. I mean, what I notice when I have candidates like Wyoming or Idaho or South Dakota, just sending them to firms that don't even have openings usually gets interest because there's just not a lot of competition. So, again, everything's about the law of supply and demand. If there are not a lot of people like you, then you're going to have a much better chance of getting the job than if you're competing with lots and lots of people. So people go to Alaska. I don't think I would ever do that, but they go to Alaska and they get jobs. They all these smaller cities and states and things there's a lot of opportunity. So you just have to think about the law of supply and demand. And kind of interesting, like if you were to go to like Stanford or Yale Law School and get a job in Nebraska, you would be like a huge hotshot your entire life because there's not a lot of people like you. So many times when you go to smaller markets, it's kind of interesting. In smaller markets, if you say you're an attorney in Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or something, no one really cares. It's just like whatever. But if you're an attorney in a lot of the smaller markets, then people actually are like, wow, this is an attorney. And it's like a big deal and they respect it. So I would encourage anyone doing a job search to try to look at smaller markets. I mean, I'll have a candidate like in say, Palo Alto or something who's lost their job. And they want to work, they're very concerned. They haven't gotten any interviews. And then I'm like, okay, well, why don't you look at Wyoming, Nebraska, and Missouri? And all of a sudden they get all these interviews with all these firms. And so, just not limiting yourself to certain markets can often be very, very smart. And very, very few people do that. And I highly recommend it. Someone asked the question, would it be possible to copy these slides? Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good idea. We should start, let me write that down, posting slides. Yeah, so I think the slides are something that I'll start posting. So slides, let me just write this down. A question that would help a lot of people. So I'm writing this down, some slides. So I will start putting those online. Okay. Okay, so this person, the question about an in-house attorney. So I'm a licensed attorney who's only worked in-house post-grad 4 years. I don't have an ego, and I'm happy to start as a first year. Any advice on how to connect with law firms, communicate, interest outside of the OCI process? Yes. So again, like what I said earlier, you need to send your resume and apply to firms in locations where there's not a lot of people like you. So, biases by law firms against in-house attorneys, pretty simple, not in law firm, experience, not focused, typically. So you're doing a lot of different things, no idea of how you would perform. So, and it's a different role. So the role is, an authority in the company, not necessarily working for partners and different boutiques and all that sort of stuff. So it's just, these are different biases that people will have against an attorney. So again, if you're trying to get a job in a law firm, no one probably is going to hire you as a first year, but you need to send your application and apply to places that other people aren't applying to get a job. That's all. So I did want to talk a little bit also about what are generalists, specialists. So a generalist is someone that does a lot of different types of law. So when you get into very focused markets like California, if you are a generalist as an in-house attorney, there's going to be more specialists. When you start getting into these smaller markets, there's not as many like large clients. So in like Wyoming, if you're in the corporate department of a mid-sized firm, if you were in New York, you might be doing only securities, you might be doing only M&A, or you might be doing only one type of corporate law. Whereas if you're in a smaller market, because the clients are smaller, you'll be doing more generalist work. So, and then when you get like solo practitioners will typically do whatever comes in the door a lot of times. So, so that's kind of interesting. I remember once interviewing an attorney in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and he did like personal injury, he corporate, he trust estates, he did all these different things. So many times if you're a generalist working in a smaller firm is actually an option. So it all depends on the size market that you're trying to work in, and that's, I think, the biggest piece of advice I can give you when you work in smaller markets. So if you're in-house attorney and you become a generalist doing that, then working for a smaller firm or someone that's very very small firm, like even 1 or 2 people, that can be a good option for you if you have generalist skills. And again, people hired based on the law supply. Let's see some other questions. I'm just reading these questions. Okay, this person says, but journal articles. So how do I write journal articles that show my stuff and enhance my resume? How do I pick a topic? How do I find an editor? How do I find a journal and publish it? Okay, so what I've talked about when I talk about journal articles and things like that, all I'm talking about are things to kind of beef up your resume and look like you're very focused on something. So an example would be, and I give this example a lot, if you went to see a doctor and one doctor just kind of said he was, whatever, he was a plastic surgeon, he was just a plastic surgeon. And then there was another plastic surgeon he went to, and that plastic surgeon had written all these articles about different procedures he did. He was on all these committees or members of all these plastic surgery bars, and he had kind of this resume that went on and on and on about everything he'd done. Well, that looks very authoritative. Like you would want to hire that plastic surgeon because he looks like, or she looks like, they're just all in and they're doing all this stuff. And it's much more impressive than finding someone that just doesn't do that, is just kind of out there. So always in your career, you want to beef it up and look like you're an expert. I had a recruiter working for me years ago. He was getting started in the profession. He really wanted to do it. And so I met with him. And when I met with him, initially I was like, you have to, do whatever you can. You have to write articles for us. You have to go on presentations. You have to, really beef up your resume. So by the time he'd worked for me for, 5 or 6 years, he had this resume that was incredible. He'd given all these presentations. And so, when he listed himself on the BCG website, it was like boom, 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 like all these things. And when attorneys were investigating what recruiters to use, they saw this and loved it. He just looked very, very strong, and still does. He puts presentations on the Columbia Law School and all this stuff. And so, what does that mean exactly? Well, what that means is that he became someone that looked very, very good. People wanted to work with, as opposed to other recruiters that may have had nothing, which is the majority of recruiters. The majority of recruiters will say, I'm a recruiter, but they won't go all in and look like they're very, very strong. So that's what you need to do. And this recruiter's resume became so strong that he left our company because he was recruited by a recruiting company that basically told him, if you come over here and you work for a couple of years, these are older recruiters, we'll give you 50% of the business because you're just awesome and we'll help our name going forward. And so, that's what can happen. He was recruited away to be the owner of another recruiting firm because his resume was so strong. That would not have happened to him had he just looked like kind of blah on paper. And that's the kind of stuff that you need to do. You need to look like an expert at whatever you're doing. And very, very few people do this. Most people are just doing their job. They're just saying, I'm this type of attorney and we'll do it. But they don't look any different than other people that do it. So how do you look different? You just get all the stuff related to your practice area on your resume. So it says, this person says, how do I pick a topic? How do I find an editor? How to find a journal, publish it? You just become an expert in something. That's it. You become an expert and you write things related just to your practice area you want to do, nothing but that. And then you do it. But I want to just make another quick point. There's differences between academics versus, non-academics. You don't want to become an academic. You just want to showcase, that you're an expert in your practice area. I don't care. You can write like little articles for New York Law Journal. It doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that you look as strong as you possibly can in your practice area, because then you'll look like the best choice. And this is something almost no one does. We have recruiters come here and they just like, okay, I'm a recruiter, give you some candidates. And that typically is not a great long-term strategy for your career. You need to look very, very strong on paper, because if you do, people will choose you over other people. Why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you want to look like the best trust in the state's attorney, or the best corporate attorney? Why wouldn't you want to do that? I had something interesting happen once. I had this case where I was suing someone, a real estate deal, and it was about one little aspect of the real estate deal, like options. I don't want to get too much into it, but it was about this one little aspect of the real estate deal. And I searched for an attorney. And the only one I found was like, I don't know, he was in Northern California somewhere. And I searched the entire state. And he was the only person that I found that had ever written something about this issue. So I hired him. So why wouldn't I? And it was just because I found him based on his publishing a little article about it that wasn't even very long. And that's how I found him. So we see here, question to ego. Second. Okay, this is a good question. And there's always a lot of LLMs on the call. And I will, LLMs often from other countries and things, and they have these kind of questions. Okay, is it reasonable for an undergraduate to apply for paralegal positions if they're unable to secure an attorney role before receiving their bar license? And could such a role potentially negatively affect how future employers fit a candidate's resume? Yes. No one. If you take the bar exam and you pass, no one, absolutely no one should be working as a paralegal. I see this all the time. I see, if I'm looking at 200 resumes of attorneys, I will usually find at least one of them that is a L or something like that, or an attorney working as a paralegal. No one needs to work as a paralegal. No one needs to work as a contract attorney. No one needs, it's crazy. If you take the bar exam and you pass, you can always get a job. There are always going to be law firms and lawyers that want to hire you. You just have to look at more markets. So again, I hate to keep coming back to this example, but it's a very, very powerful example, because no one is doing this. Everyone out there is trying to apply to the big firms or the biggest places they possibly can, and they don't get out there and really expose themselves to the market. And if you are an LLM or whoever the hell you are, if you think you bottom your class at the top law school, if you graduated from law school, there's always going to be places that will hire you. Where me and I was unemployed, and all I was getting in New York City were paralegal jobs or something, that's unacceptable. Like, you need to get out there and you need to search for firms and apply to them. So, people probably want a little example here, and what do you do? Like, how do you find places that you want to apply to? How do you, what is a good procedure for doing that? So you have obviously New York with 8 million people, you can always, Niagara Falls, what a beautiful place. So, if you look at Niagara Falls, Niagara Falls would be, let's say, when you do personal injury, just, personal injury firms, Niagara Falls, and you're going to find all of these people that do personal injury. No one that gets an LLM and is trying to get a job in New York and is only getting paralegal jobs needs to limit themselves to firms in New York if they're not getting jobs. You can look at cities all over New York. This is just, Niagara Falls. All these personal injury people, so what do you do? Say, you want to get a job in Niagara Falls. What is it you do to get a job? Now, first of all, what I'm talking about just being broad in your search. But when I say apply to all these firms, what do you do? So how do you do it? This is a personal injury firm, but one of many in Niagara Falls. Now, look at all these practice areas they do. What if you want to do real estate in Niagara Falls, or IRS and tax issues? You're going to do personal injury. How do you get a job in these places? Okay, so this firm is called Cole, Sorrento, and Pearly. So I would think that the guy to apply to would be Cole. So you go here and you just, I guess he's in Buffalo, but they have other offices, but you go here and you can see this particular guy. He doesn't have all these accomplishments and stuff listed, which doesn't make him look as strong. But you see this particular guy and you go and you find his contact information. So maybe this is how you contact. I have no idea. But you would go and you would get his you would get his email, and then you would send him an application saying, I want to be a personal injury attorney. I'm interested in working for you. And that's it. So it's really not that not that difficult. I mean, look at all these firms. It's just ludicrous. I mean, there's so many places that the attorney can work without having to be a paralegal. There's literally tens of thousands of them. So who are these people? Let's see here. Golden Gate Lawyers. You go here. Here we go. You go here and you figure out their emails and you contact them. So most of the time, the attorneys will have their email on their site. I also want to show you something else here. They have blogs. So why do they blog? They want to blog because they want to look like experts in their practice area. But this is all you do. And here this is an email address here, info@goldenlawyer. So you'd send them your resume saying I'd like to work there. Now, if you do this for one person, your odds of getting the job are pretty slim. But if you do this with 1,000 people or 100 or 50, instead of working as a paralegal, my God, you can get a job. So everybody is employable. You just have to look at enough markets and people to try to get a position. If someone says, where will you post the slides? So this article is based on, or this webinar is based on an article. So if you look up the title of the article, this webinar will be posted in there, like the webinar itself, and then also the slides. I will post the slides. I think having the slides out there is a really good idea. And I appreciate someone, you asking for that, because I think we have probably hundreds of these slides probably helpful for people. Okay, before moving to the US and earning my degree, I gained significant experience working in M&A and private equity. Ideally, I want to continue in this field in the future. However, I understand that such roles are currently in lower demand in the market, with the market being down. What is your advice for seeking job opportunities in areas that do not align with the field where I have substantial experience and ultimately want to work? Okay, so it's a good question. So someone with M&A experience wants to get a job, private equity and M&A. So, what do you do if you're from a foreign country and you want to work in those practice areas? So you are a specialist, which is good for the most part. So specialist meaning a niche practice area, and you have issues because you're not from the U.S. Basically, not from the U.S. And firms that do that sort of work are more likely to hire U.S. attorneys for a bunch of different reasons. But I would say the big reasons are they know the firms are know similar experience. I got similar experience in the U.S., which they understand. And in addition to the similar experience, there's also the fact that there's no sponsorship and all those sorts of things. So you kind of come up against that issue. So it's very, very difficult for an L with experience, regardless of the firm, to get experiences transferable to that will make U.S. law firm hire you, because you're competing with U.S. attorneys that people understand their experience. They understand the law school they went to get their JD. An LLM program, you can't really compare people there because it's not like you graduate in the top 5% of your class or something. So there's all these issues with LLMs getting positions in the U.S. Because they need sponsorship and all that sort of thing. So what do you do? All you do is you just, you apply to firms that are smaller in locations. I keep saying this, but in locations where there is not a lot of competition. That's it. So you apply to firms like that, and you find them and you do that. So you can do it yourself. You can actually, I'm promoting things, but we have a service that helps people do that. Like if you want to try to find a position in different markets and so forth, these are kind of the big things that law firms look at when they're thinking about who to hire. They want to hire people that are currently working in law firms. They want to hire people with U.S. citizenship and JD experience level, all this sorts of stuff. So, and these are services, by the way, that will basically apply to jobs for you. I'm not going to promote them too much, but they're actually awesome. Like, we can apply to find all the firms for you in different markets and that would work, and then apply to them for you. But, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but what you should be doing as someone looking for a position is you should be applying to smaller firms where you're more likely to be a generalist. That's what I would recommend. Or find attorneys in smaller markets and may do M&A for smaller clients or something along those lines. So always working in the smaller markets is likely to help you. Let me see here. Okay, this question's about ego. I don't think I'm going to answer that. This person asked about I'll answer these, I guess. This question is someone asked, how do I identify the right firms to apply to reduce my, are there certain indicators that can help me assess whether a firm is likely to be a good fit before I invest time in the application process? You need to apply to every possible place you can. So I keep saying that over and over again, but you can't, like, sometimes people will just be looking at firms where to apply, and they will go and they will analyze the firm and see what it says on Glassdoor or whatever about the firm. And they will, that will be, kind of how they do things. And, what I would say is, you can't, regardless of what people say online about a firm, you can never really judge the quality of a firm or what it's going to be like to work there, because you could be working with different partners in different practice areas. Every practice area inside a law firm is different. So law firm may have 10 practice areas. Well, it means something to work in one practice area as opposed to another. So you should never be judging firms before you apply to them. I think we're pretty much out of questions. Let me just see here. All right. So do you provide one-on-one counseling for attorneys looking for a job? Yes, I do. So let me see if I can find that online. I do provide one-on-one counseling for people looking for a job. So let me just see if I can pull that up. Okay, well, I do provide counseling for people looking for a job. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I do. And again, maybe I will try to promote that on the next call. But if you send me an email, my personal email is Harrison, Harrison, Barrister. I'll just write it up here and I'll send you a link. I do provide career counseling. Typically what I'll do is I'll do like a half-hour appointment for either your resume or for like just general career advice. But if you send me an email, I will send you a link to that service that we have. And it's actually very helpful because I can deconstruct your resume usually in about 15 minutes and fix it. And then I can also give you advice about where to apply and how to apply and all that sort of stuff. So it's actually could be transformative for your career. But, again, a lot of people don't want to spend the money. So, it's up to you, but it's a very good investment. So it's here. Okay, so I thank everyone for being here today. I think this was a very good webinar in terms of what you learned. I would encourage everyone to do everything you possibly can to apply to as many places as possible, not take rejection seriously, but try to focus your resume in a practice area and don't limit yourself and worry about getting rejected, because you're going to be rejected, but typically in the largest markets. And when the economy slows down, to be rejected. And a lot of firms you normally wouldn't be, depending on your practice area. So I hope that helped everyone. I'll be back next week, and then this title of this webinar does have an article on BCG. So I will make sure that we post the slides because I think it's about that. So thanks everyone, and I will be back next week.